Welcome to Danish Policy. I'm Charlene.
I'm Crispin.
And this is our Week in Review. Danish Policy is a channel aimed at intelligent people who discuss important issues facing life and society. How have you been, Crispin?
I've been excellent. It's been a good couple of weeks. The Olympic Games have been on.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It's such a highlight.
Yeah, and I was really pensive about it going in. I was like...
Because there's no crowds?
Yeah, no crowds, no opening ceremony. Everyone's wearing a mask. Like, I just thought, why would he have the Olympic Games? It's just going to remind people of how depressing everything is. We don't need that right now. I was like, well, I guess, the athletes obviously deserve to compete. They've worked so hard. Japan has a right to host the game. So I could kind of understand why it was going ahead, but I didn't go into it with any degree of enthusiasm. But watching the events, watching the competition, it did give me the feels, because it was like, well, they were all very positive, really great atmosphere, even without like the crowds and so forth.
Yeah.
The performances, the athleticism was really, really great. And it just gave a taste of something wholesome. We're bringing people together on the international stage, which is what the Olympic Games is all about. That was really positive.
Yeah.
So I've been very glad of the things that I have seen. Really tough competitions. And Australia, of course, as I said in the video, doing really, really well.
Yeah, it's just amazing. Like, I remember, well, I don't usually watch sports, okay? So I'm just looking at this swimming, like, why are these countries in the middle? And like, in terms of like swimming laps and stuff, and like my family will chime in, like teach me about how the competition worked. And then you just like, go. And you just get so into it. And like everyone's around and it's amazing. And then, and then they tell you like how old they are. And they're like, oh, this person's 18, 14. And you think to yourself, what was I doing at 18? But no, like it's absolutely like just an amazing. I'm just in awe the whole time, just like, how is this possible? And I do think it's been like such a highlight, especially for those in Australia who are currently in lockdown, or have lots of restrictions. Where we're very fortunate, but other places not so much. And I think having some place where they can go to, and it's on 24-hour roll to see just real achievement. And again, countries coming together, putting their politics, well, going back to that, like putting their politics aside, but really, showing true sportsmanship. And
well, if you want longevity in sport, become an equestrian. Because the gold medalist Australian there was, I think, 62 years of age. So oldest Olympian, I think oldest Olympian ever, like Olympian gold medalist ever. Yeah. And so there is a massive age range. And then Keegan something, the skateboarder who won the gold medal, which I'll talk about more, he might be our youngest gold medalist ever, I would say. I don't know how old he is, but he's a kid. So
he's very young.
So you see really young winners in gymnastics and things like that, but I think Australia hasn't had a gold medalist that young in anything. I think this year being the first year for skateboarding. Speaking of skateboarding, the things that I've really enjoyed is watching those athletes that are just so far beyond the competition. Right. Like, so we remember Usain Bolt in the sprinting all those years ago. He would pull up before he hits the finish line because he's like so far ahead. He doesn't even need to race for it. He's just like chilling out. People would criticize him for almost showing off by how fast he was beating everybody else.
Yeah.
You
don't make him feel bad.
yeah. Well, he would just pull up at the end. It'd be like a 100-meter sprint and he'd be 10 meters ahead. He's like, oh, okay, I guess I can just walk the last few meters.
Wow.
So there was that. But in the pole vaulting, there was this Swedish guy who is a world champion, world record holder. He just creamed the competition. He was so much better than everybody else. And I much respect for the guy who got silver, the American, because he got like 5 personal bests in a row to keep with him. So what happens is they raise the bar, like everybody who can clear that height gets to the next round, and they keep going up.
Yeah.
And he kept scraping through, like they would up the bar and he would just graze it and it wouldn't fall off, and he'd be like cheering because he would just make his best all-time height. And the Swede would be clearing it by, several feet. But still, the Swede was like raising his eyebrows that this guy managed to keep with him for a long, long way. But then in the end, there was just no way. Like he was a freak. And the skateboarding, like I just mentioned. So I always thought that Australia and you see skateboarders around, but I thought like, skateboarding would be dominated by the United States or Canada, a place like that. Well, this kid in skateboarding, first year that we've had it as Olympic sport, the put it this way, the silver medalist got a score of like 85, and the bronze, so guy from Brazil, kid from the US got a score of 84 for the bronze, so really close, right? Gold medal, Australian kid, 95 point something, like just obliterated the competition, made skateboarding tricks and everything just look so easy, flawlessly executing every one of his maneuvers, like around a very difficult track.
Yeah. It looks so flawless that you have to see the slow motion video in order to figure out what he actually did.
Yeah. It just looks like he's chilling about. Yeah, it's just like he's just gone for a stroll. But the funny thing is, out there in the Australian streets, because you'll know my my video on Australian like culture and emphasis on athleticism. Well, skateboarders have always been kind of annoying for the average person on the street, like because they're out there like
kind of like cyclists. I'd
yeah,
say.
but at least, I mean, yes, a bit like cyclists, but at least cyclists are going from A to B. They're using it as a mode of transport, whereas skateboarders are just getting people's way, right? People are walking along and skateboarders are like tripping over and stacking everything and making noise and potentially damaging property and breaking things. So people are kind of like, okay, like they just sort of put up with it.
Yeah.
Well, the last little while, you go out there at the streets and there people are like, skateboarding, and they're just like, yeah, I'm training, I'm being a hero. And everyone's like, yeah. It's like, there's a new respect. It's like, what the hell is skateboarding doing at the Olympics? And now it's like, skateboarding is a quintessentially the primary Olympic sport. And everyone, and skateboarders out there are contributing to our national pride. So it's amazing. I should remember the last time something like that happened, wasn't to do with sport. It was with the Game of Thrones television series. So Peter Dinklage plays Tyrion Lannister, and Peter Dinklage, of course, is a dwarf, as the character is. And prior to Tyrion coming along as a character, people who had, like parents who had a kid and they're just like told that their babies have dwarfism or something like that, they'd be heartbroken. They'd be like, oh no, my kid has this big disability. All right, we're just gonna have to live with it and see what we can do, and love them anyway. Blah blah blah. Work through it. So it's sort of seen as a crisis. Whereas during those Game of Thrones years, where Tyrion Lannister was the most popular character in the entire series, played to perfection by Peter Dinklage, he single-handedly transformed everyone's view of dwarfism. Everyone's like, oh, I've got a dwarf, right? I've got my own Tyrion. Suck it, Tywin. It's amazing how these sorts of like figures can transform attitudes, and certainly the skateboarding in Australia has, I think, changed attitude a lot.
Yeah, I do agree, because if you see a skateboard, you're like, okay, wow, like you go, how you see like runners on the road, like doing like obviously training. You're like, go, like marathon runners. You're like, you see skateboarders, like, it's so weird.
Yeah, it's all happened in the last few weeks. So cultural transformation towards skateboarding has been the way. But no, Olympics has been good. It's been a good distraction. It reminds people that people have a lot more similarities than they have differences, and can bring together. And the importance of the Olympic Games. My one criticism of it is that this has been the first year where political protests have been permitted. So we've seen people waving their little banners and people on the podium kind of, showing little things. I don't really like that. I think that the Olympic Games is that one escape from politics where people can come together and put aside all their political differences and baggage and personal campaigns and views just for 2 weeks, where we can celebrate sport and sport and competition. Injecting politics into it is dangerous. And people, it's also short-sighted, because like, let's say you have, the gay marathon runner who's there with his gay pride flag at the end celebrating gay rights. Okay, that's fine and whatever. But if you allow that, then you also have to allow the Eastern European who burns a gay pride flag, in protest for gay, perversions and so forth. Like, you have to allow that stuff, because people are protesting on the basis of their own political campaign. It's not like in other parts of human endeavor where they're complying with a specific code where certain things are allowed but not others. So people have to be mindful of that. We don't want it to be dominated by politics. And that's the thing that I lament. I'm hopeful that future Olympics will strip that back out, because I don't think that adds anything to the game. Even if the causes are worthy or things that you personally support, there are other times and places for it. This is
I agree.
Because it's not just about like the fact that it takes away from the sport. It undermines what the Olympic Games actually represents. It's that moment where no matter who you are, where you're from, even if your countries are in dire conflict, you can share a moment of humanity on the sporting arena. Like something can happen and people can show their own empathy and feeling and compassion. And if you inject political campaigns in that, you actually make it personal, and that's not what the Olympics is designed for. It actually does make it a bit pointless if you make it a political enterprise.
Yeah, I do agree. And it is like that's the thing I love about the Olympics. You just hear about all these very, very small countries that you don't really see reported in the news, right? And like there's like 2 people representing the country. But when I saw the opening ceremony, they have the biggest smile on their face and like, we are here to represent our country, and like so proud, and it's just like, I don't know, it's like that moment. I don't care about, obviously it's important to be knowledgeable about these things, but it's not the point of the Olympics. The point of the Olympics, we're all here together, binded by one thing, which is sport that is non-political. And also like just gives the opportunity for people to shine despite their backgrounds. Like you're not held by, countries. There are Olympic countries that are very, very poor, and you can kind of see the disparity of it, but they're still winning gold. And that's just incredibly inspiring. Well,
it blows apart the whole idea that there's nothing genetic in sport. Like, so West Africans will always win the 100-meter sprint, and East Africans will always win the long-distance marathons. Like, that's just because of human evolution. It's just, and that's just a fact, But obviously a lot of other things go into it as well, as my video talked about in the case of Australia.
And I always thought, right, okay, like I'm not a great swimmer, but I at least I know how not to drown in the swimming pool. And I do agree with that video that he did about how Australia and New Zealand can win so much gold despite us having such a small population. But I think the biggest thing is the investment into sport. Like, I feel like other countries have millions and millions of people, I don't know, Indonesia or some place, they just don't invest in sport. So they can't, Well,
Indonesia is a special case as well, because you've got 100, so the population in Indonesia is 250 million. Half of those, more than half, are on Jakarta, one little island about a third the size of Tasmania. Right, so there just isn't any to have a football field, right? That would be takes up an enormous amount of their space. Okay, whereas in Australia we have millions and millions of square kilometers that have nobody in it. Okay, so land is not a premium, and going out there and exploring and exercising is not in any way dangerous. You might be like in Jakarta and there's pollution everywhere and you're cramped with your traffic and everything. It's not like when you see those runners in the street you were talking about. You can run down a main street of the CBD in any Australian capital city and maybe 5 or 6 in the afternoon when everyone's leaving work, it'll be a bit chockers, but most of the time runners could do that with very little interruption, right? They'll see people in the street easily run around them. Whereas in Jakarta, how are you going to do that? Like, how are you going to run in the street and not knock someone over? So there's that physical opportunity that's a big factor at play. I'm sure you're right that there isn't the same investment, but also just not the same. But there's not the same outdoor kind of.
Yeah, no, I agree. Definitely, I agree. Definitely, where you come from is a huge thing. Is wealth. Honestly, the more wealthy the country is, more likely they can invest in the Olympics because they're not having to invest in poverty, uplift people in poverty. It's
That's true. Mind you, that as you say, some of the poorest countries in the world win.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but again, there's exceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess I don't know if there's anything else really. I don't. If you could be very good at like one Olympic sport, like which one would it be? Like,
well, that's a great question. So, I have seen a lot of interesting sports. I saw this one sort of young Russian
right.
who won a gold medal, and she is a Witcher fan. So she had her like Witcher medallion around her waist, and she was young. She was probably, I don't know, 20 odd. And she was firing like a 30 centimeter pistol, and she just had the most relaxed pose. I'll see if I can get the photo, but it's so maybe shooting, but no. I mean, I think if chess was an Olympic sport, I'd like to win chess. Like winning a chess gold medal would be pretty amazing. Not likely to happen, of course, but let's say if I could win a gold medal, it'll probably be in that sport. Of the actual
like physical sport.
Well, I think chess was an Olympic sport.
Is it?
In some years, yeah, it is a sport, right? Like
it's a sport, but it's not like.
Yeah, no, but let's restrict it to the sports that we saw. Let's say the sports that were there. I think probably the 100-meter sprint, simply because it makes you the most famous. I think that's like whoever is the fastest runner in the world gets a certain degree of notoriety that others sports don't get. Like, let's say you win the hammer throw, right? Well, name any hammer throw gold medalist off the top of your head. Like, unless you're in the actual field, you'd have no idea.
It's true. Yeah, I was about to say, I want to do like hurdles because that just looks so hard.
Yeah. Well, in terms of the most difficult, that's another interesting question. What would be the hardest sport? I think pole vaulting looks precarious, like you're grabbing a pole and you're trying to fly in the air. That's kind of like, that must be really hazardous. The rock climbing, like the indoor climbing, that looked difficult. I
mean, I watched the rhythmic artistic gymnastics, I think they called it now. That is so hard. Like they get like a ball or like a hoop and then or ribbon, and then they have to just play with that and like throw in the air, do twists and turns and catch it and roll it across their body. Like I was like, wow. Like, they may look very easy, like it's a part of their body.
Yeah, I think, I agree. I think gymnastics is probably the hardest.
I think so too. Yeah. Like, I feel you have to be built. I mean, like, I think for every sport, you can't have to be built for it, but gymnastics, particularly from a young age, it's not something you can just easily. I can't say that. I don't do that much sport. It's probably all hard, like skateboarding. Oh, okay, cool. All right. And then you also talked about this week is Belarus. And we had a Olympian that was actually asked to be sent home to Belarus. What was her name again?
Kristina Tinsamanoskaya.
Sorry for butchering it. But yes, so she is a sprinter, I think. She's a sprinter, but then she was thrown into the relay and like a couple days because they had failed to do enough doping tests or something for the team. Yeah. So they were trying to fill it in. And I think she criticized saying that she wasn't enough time from the coach. And then I guess they were taken back because being criticized publicly online is never a good thing. And when she was about to go home, her grandmother called her and said, "You can't come back. It's dangerous here."
Yeah.
And then she took humanitarian, what's it called? Visa, yes, to Poland. It's crazy. It's actually crazy just how I feel like all this news from Belarus is just, just spiraling. And I don't know, like... one thing that really stood out in that video actually is all this this proud Slavic tradition. Like, where does that come from? Like, was that?
Well, yeah, okay. So that video was a kind of a slightly different tone in the sense that, yes, I summarized all of the things and we mentioned the athlete. We shouldn't also forget about Vitaly Shishov, who was found dead, an opposition figure. And we don't know what, like he was found hanging. We don't know exactly what happened to him, but one can be suspicious. It was a different tone because we can criticize individuals and countries and say, look, these are the people responsible. But then there are innocents who aren't involved in all of the politics and history and things like Christina, who said, look, I'm not political. I'm just a sports person. I don't know anything about Belarus.
And she wants to come back to Belarus. So I'm that's why I'm saying there's obviously something there. Like people are very proud to be part of Belarus and their culture. And I guess like I'm just trying to untwine more about it.
So the reason, and so I was sorry, I know what you're asking, and the reason I'm giving this sort of preamble is because it's important to say that when we look at right and wrong in international relations, there's right, there's wrong, and then there's the practical, and the pragmatic. And when you've got these non-political figures being affected, right, who say, I just want my people to not live in fear, that means we need to bring all the people into the tent, Right. And so to answer your question, there is a Slavic identity. I know a lot of people who still identify as Soviet, even though they're part of the former Soviet republics, right? Mm-hmm. And I would say that Slavic tradition comes from Constantinople. So Orthodox Christianity, Orthodox Church, it's a beautiful religion, right? The mosaics, the incense, the chantings, the music, the iconography, absolutely stunning, and is a unique art tradition as well. And Constantinople was the capital of Byzantium. Mm-hmm. Byzantium was the inheritor of the Roman Empire. So in the late classical period, the Western Roman Empire collapses under the weight of the Goths and the Vandals, and the Eastern Roman Empire continues on, right? So when we talk about the fall of Rome, we're only talking about the western half. The Eastern Roman Empire was still there and survived all of the vicissitudes of barbarian invasion and the fight against the Sassanid Persians and so forth. And by the kind of early Middle Ages, sort of 6th to 9th century AD, was the greatest power in the world, right? The Byzant was the reserve currency, much like the US dollar is today. Yeah. You had the reconquest of Justinian, which saw North Africa and Egypt and Italy brought back into the imperial fold, at least briefly. So Byzantium was the main power of the world. And then you had the religious split between Rome and the East, and that was based around a few things, but ultimately Charlemagne of France, of Francia, became the kind of emperor, if you like, charged with protection of Rome, and the Byzantines no longer had that role. And then the Byzantines saw the Patriarch of Constantinople and the Emperor of Byzantium as the leaders of the church, and so they disagreed with the Pope. So that was that great schism that happened, and they went in different physical and then ultimately theological directions. And then what happened was that the Viking Age was happening at the same time. So you had the Viking invasions famously of England. Right. You had the Viking invasions of Normandy, so it's where we get the Normans. And it's the Viking expansion into other parts of the world, including Russia. The word Russia is from the word Rus, right? And the Rus are Scandinavians, okay? The Kievan Rus, the Rus of Novgorod, right? Now, if we think of Kievan Rus, modern day Kiev.
I know, I was actually like, is that a food?
Novgorod, right? Which is the capital of the old kingdom of Novgorod outside of modern day St. Petersburg, a couple of hours away, actually.
There's 3 groups. Are you telling me 3 groups? Yes.
Well, they're all the same peoples, right? They settle different lands, okay? Right. But they're Scandinavian peoples and they settle different lands. But then there are the Slavs, right, which is sort of Slavic migrations. The word Slav actually means slave, right? And these were now they weren't all slaves; they were just called that by the Ottoman Turks and people like that who would buy them because they were extraordinarily beautiful. And the Golden Horde, when the Mongols invaded in the 1200s, they conquered much of Russia and so forth. And so the Slavic peoples became prized chattel, if you like, in the Golden Horde slave trade and things like that. And then, of course, they fought for their independence and won and became great civilizations in their own right. So obviously I'm skipping over the centuries of story here, but the key moment is when in the 900s AD, Emperor Basil of Byzantium, his daughter, I think it was, he sends off to be married to Vladimir of Kiev. Okay. Now, she bitterly protested this at the time because she didn't want to be, like, at the time, the Byzantium was the center of learning, culture, languages, all of the research, scholarship, and to be sent off to some barbarian kingdom in some ice-filled part of the world wasn't her idea of a good time. But I think she was won over in the end. She grew to really care about Vlad. And one of the things that Vlad did was he did a couple of big things. One, he sent 6,000 personal bodyguard to Basil of Emperor, and they were highly valued warriors. So these were tall Norsemen with big double-handed battle axes, and they were quite unique, relative to the Mediterraneans who are, darker skinned and so forth. You had these tall blonde hair, blue eyes figures. They were kind of unusual, and that formed what became the Varangian Guard, famous elite battle group of the Byzantium army, and we can do a whole video on that. And the second thing it is would convert to Orthodox Christianity. And there's a wonderful little anecdote behind that where he was trying to work out. He knew that they had to abandon their pagan gods, right? He wanted to convert to one of the faiths. And he's like, but I don't know which one. And he wanted to convert for political reasons. He wanted to get the advantages that came from political membership of their different faith. Yeah. And there were three big ones that he was choosing from. He wanted to know about the Roman tradition, the Roman Christianity, the Orthodox Christianity of Byzantium, and the Islam of the East. He also apparently even sent envoys to Jerusalem to find out about Judaism, just to get a better understanding. Yeah. And they all came back. And they all reported different things that they loved about what they had seen. But when the Orthodox people came back, they said, or the envoys to Orthodox Christianity came back and they said, look, Byzantium is heaven on earth. Like, we can't even begin to describe the beauty of what we've just seen. So it's like, okay, well, that seems to be the one I go for.
And then marry my daughter.
Yeah, and then he married into the royal family. And so that created that link that existed, and they became loyal allies thereafter. Now, this is very interesting because until that time, there had been many Viking raids, like we would see in England, many Viking raids on Byzantium from the Kievan Rus, right? So this put an end to all of that. Yeah. Now, unlike the UK, which the Viking invasions shaped that entire world, the Byzantians managed to fight off the Vikings quite easily, not like with significant casualties and hardship. There was all these battles with the Kievan Rus, but there was the Greek fire, which was the famous secret weapon of Byzantium, which is so secret, in fact, that the formula has been lost to history. But
sorry, secret what?
It was a secret weapon. It was essentially a substance that could burn on water. So it would be shot out of Greek ships or thrown from little canisters, and it would ignite in the open sea, right? And that obliterated medieval ships, right? So when you think of the Viking longboat sailing up the river, right? Well, if it's all ignited because it sails into like, a petroleum fire or something, well, that's not going to go well for them. So so they were annihilated by the Byzantine navy. But there were two major invasions of Byzantium by the Kievan Rus prior to this conversion. Anyway, so the Vlad becomes Orthodox Christian, and right through the rest of the 1,000-year history of Russia, they were all Orthodox Christians, and they adopted Orthodox traditions, and they turned to Constantinople for guidance in spiritual matters. And when Constantinople fell in 1453, the Russians assumed or claimed the right to the heritage of that tradition, right? So the Tsar means Caesar in Russian, a throwback to the Roman tradition, and the Roman imperial family laid claim often to Constantinople. So to revive the Byzantine Empire was one of their long-standing dreams, and one of the things that drove the centuries-long animosity between Russia and Turkey. So the Crimean War, many wars before that were fought, in large part because of the idea that Russia was there to protect all of the Slavic peoples, right? So the peoples of the Balkans, Serbia, Croatia, even the Greeks, and Macedonia, like all of these, not that Greeks are Slavs, but that Orthodox tradition. And so Russia has always felt that kind of paternalistic role, and the Belarusians consider themselves Slavs of those Slavic traditions.
I see. Yeah.
So the Slavs, and they are their own people. Like the Slavic, religion is one big thing, but a lot of the pagan traditions, the way they name their children, the reasons for that, their personal festivals, the Maslenitsa, like all of this is very pagan Slavic. And then there's some shared kind of traditions as well. So some things they share with the Poles, which are also partly Slavic. So obviously Poland and Russia aren't the best of friends, but they have certain cultural traditions. So when we talk about the Witcher, like I mentioned with the Olympian, right? That's a Slavic myth, with the witches, and then the Baba Yaga, and the various sort of Russian pagan myths that are shared across the Slavic landscape. So a lot of pan Eastern Europeans, Balkan kind of identity, religious, cultural, historical.
Was there any point that Belarus was anywhere like near Lithuania and? Yeah,
so for centuries Belarus was part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. So the Poles and the Lithuanians look at Belarus and they go, these are our compatriots. These were part of our same great civilization. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth stretched from the Baltic Sea down to the Black Sea, and so Belarus was part of that. And so but the thing about the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, it was multi-ethnic. Like in fact, the Poles were the most populous, of course. Lithuanians made up about 10%, but even the Ruthenians made up like 20%. So there were multiple ethnicities that comprised the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It wasn't sort of the same linguistic, cultural tradition. And in fact, one of the things about the video that I need to make on the next installment of Lithuanian history is picking all that apart, because so much of people adopted Polish tradition and so much people adopted Lithuanian tradition. So yeah, they see Belarus in that context, but the Belarusians themselves don't see themselves as like when they ask, what's your heritage? They don't say the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. They say, our Slavic roots.
Yeah.
Now that's not to say that they don't have similarities. They're obviously in great proximity. They share a border. They've been through a lot of the same things. Obviously, climate, history. There's a lot of things that are tied up together.
Yeah.
But they don't see themselves as the same peoples.
Yeah, and I guess from that video, you're kind of leaning towards the idea that they can coexist. Like it's not. I don't know. Like I feel like there is so much pressure to free Belarus and change them from Russia to more of a Western ideal, and I guess that's not going to happen.
Well, it won't happen in that way. And I want to kind of caveat this, because I do think that democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of association, rule of law, these are not only desirable but possible for most countries, right?
Yeah.
Where I think it needs to be careful is Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland. They're very anti-Russia for good reason. They were occupied for an unacceptable period of time, and they've got a lot of historical grievance. They're also beacons of liberty, and we've talked about on this channel how Lithuania will be the ones actually walking the walk when it comes to dealing with China's authoritarian communist regime and things like that. So no, you do not share our values. We are not going to sell ourselves out, even if others do. So standing up for rights and things like that are these things that these countries do. And there's nothing, and they're obviously protecting the Belarusian opposition and dissidents who have escaped from Belarus and set up a government in exile in Vilnius.
Yeah.
These are all good things, okay? What we need to do from a pragmatic point of view is find a way forward that doesn't throw sand in the eyes of the Russians unnecessarily. Because it's one thing for Russia to see non-Slavic people pull away and join something else. They might lament the fall of the Soviet Union, and they might think that having NATO 150 kilometers from St. Petersburg is a threat to their security. So Estonia being part of NATO is a real thorn in the side of the Russians. They might feel that, they might sort of observe it that way from a geostrategic point of view, but they don't have the same emotional investment, right? What happened in Ukraine, however you apportion the blame and everything like that, it's certainly true that the Russians see the Ukrainians as their people, right? And they see the Belarusians as their people. It's kind of like the way the Chinese view Taiwan, right?
Yeah. Okay.
We might like Taiwan as like an independent democracy and support that, and that is a good thing. But the Chinese view it differently, okay? And so what we need to do with the Belarusians, I think, is make it more like Taiwan in a political sense, i.e. democracy, free and fair elections, human rights, but politically and culturally not threaten Russia like it would be Lithuania or Poland, right? So say, look, Belarus is not going to join NATO. It's not going to join the EU. It'll still have close ties to Russia. We just want to help the Belarusian people. And through that, we might even be able to build a bit of trust on both sides. Like if Russia goes, okay, we are not going to strangle every bit of opposition to Lukashenko that we can find. We're going to allow this transition to occur. In exchange, we want to make sure that Russian interests are still preserved and that the Belarusian government is still supportive of us and that we can work together. Now that's
what's the biggest risk that could happen with
the biggest risk is that Belarus falls apart. Lukashenko loses power in a revolution. Now these are fine bits, but this is a sequence of events.
Yeah.
Lukashenko loses power in a revolution. The Western government succeed in installing who they see as the legitimate leader, i.e.
opposition.
Svetlana Tikhanovskaya is probably the most obvious choice. And the Russian military and the Russian government see this as an unacceptable overthrow as opposed to democratic reform. And that Svetlana is not, the free and fair choice of the Belarusian people, but in fact a Western puppet who's being funded and supported by, a NATO, EU, American.
I get it now. The tours, yeah.
And then Russia invades Belarus.
Right.
And starts a war. And that is not at all beyond the realms of possibility. Like this could easily end in Russia invades Belarus.
And would the people themselves also not agree to it?
Well, this is the thing. There'll be people on both sides.
Yeah.
The younger people will, by and large, see the oppression and devastation being wrought by Russia. And the Poles and the Lithuanians and stuff will do everything they can to help the pro-democratic forces because that's who they are and that's what they believe. And so Belarus will be torn apart. That's the result. And what I think is, rather than civil war, where major powers from both sides get dragged into it, we should talk about a post-Lukashenko future where there's a transition of him out of power and his family, and free and fair elections sees an indigenous person from Belarus take the reins, but with Russia being part of that process, so they don't feel undue anxiety that this is some Western plot to overthrow any Russian influence in Belarus. And I say this not because of it's right or wrong, just because I think that this is the least harmful way forward that is practical and possible. So, obviously in an ideal world, I would like, perfect democracy, perfect free and fair elections, no foreign interference in Belarus at all. Belarusian people just decide for themselves how things are going to go, and no one else has any say. Like the Russians totally respect whatever Belarus decides, even if they want to join NATO, even if they want to join EU. That's just not realistic.
Yeah, not going to happen.
No. And while that is the case, we have to respect that just those realities and work with them. If we try too hard to grandstand and moralize, then we will end up with another Ukraine. And for all of the, you go, yes, a lot of what Russia has done in Ukraine has been pretty sour. I still feel raw about the MH17 disaster where rebels shot down an airline, killed 33 Australians. There's some criticism there, but if we could go back in time to when this all began and do things differently in Ukraine, we absolutely would have, to avoid this civil conflict. Because we have reached the worst possible outcome. Even if we are ethically right, we have become, outwardly failed. And I think in international relations, and this gets more philosophical, there is moral failing in strategic ineptitude, right? I think about this in terms of Libya. All these people in the pre-Libya intervention were saying we should go in and stop Gaddafi from massacring his own people because he's going to commit an act of genocide. There was no real evidence for it besides some very obtuse rhetoric, right? There was a civil war between two armed groups, and if you then overthrow a government, you're responsible for the aftermath, right?
Yeah.
And what's happened in Libya is a catastrophe. We have Islamist governments, intersectional warlord fighting, open slave markets. Everything is that Libya now is a failed state, and that's our fault, right? So if we do things in Belarus, even for the right reasons, unless we think through the strategic implications, what will happen if we do A, how will X respond? If we haven't got plans in place for that, things can go wrong, things are unforeseeable. But if we haven't thought through the entire life cycle of what we're trying to achieve, then we have a moral failing as well as an intellectual one.
Yeah. Okay. I need to sit on that for a little bit.
Yeah, it's not a comfortable thing. International relations is moral ambiguity.
It is. Like, and it's like, how do you make the right decision? But I'm not sure. Move cautiously and
Yeah, and then personally, on a very human Crispin level, I try to play, to the extent that I can, as just a random guy, that role. I have a great love and respect for Lithuanian culture and history, as everyone knows, no doubt. I also have deep respect for Slavic traditions and cultural history. I'm a huge Byzantine history fan. Yeah, that's why I can just rattle all this stuff
clearly.
off. And Russia has achieved great things in the world. Incredible music, literature. They've reached the stars. Because I'm not a hater, I can appreciate those things that are unique with all the actors involved, and I can also understand their grievances without personally, as an Australian, being involved in it. I can focus on the practical a bit. Whereas if you're someone whose family has been, locked up in a political prison for 25 years and you've been dealing with the trauma ever since they got out. Like, your feelings towards the other side are going to be colored by that fact.
Let's wrap it up.
Mm-hmm.
We watched a movie, and our last movie, your favorite movie. What was it called again?
Oh, Leon.
Leon.
So it's one of my favorite movies. It's not. I don't know if it's my all-time favorite, but from the time period we're looking at,
just 90s. So
it was up there as, I think, probably the most sophisticated film. Of course, it's a film you couldn't make today because there is
no way.
like, it really pushes the limits of what's acceptable for cinema. But it was done in an adult way, in a respectful way, which, deals with the complexity of trauma, which I quite like. The film is about a hitman, what's called Leon, who's a hitman. Is a kind of a, like, he's very good at what he does, but he's a little bit slow. He can't read and write. He has no family in New York City except for the guy who hired him. He watches old films at the cinema by himself, right? He has no friends. His best friend is a pot plant. And he lives his life in this total isolation where all he does is go from place to place and carry out hits.
Yeah.
Then there is Matilda, who is Natalie Portman, her first film as like a little girl. Her family is killed by corrupt drug enforcement agency officers, and her life is saved by him. And the story is kind of there's parallel between him and her, and their developing kind of friendship and relationship. And then Gary Oldman is the bad guy, best bad guy ever. And he plays the drug addicted, fiendish kind of over the top, Beethoven loving DEA criminal. And some of the most intense scenes, where Natalie Portman, Matilda, has a gun to her own head to manipulate Leon into letting her have him, letting her stay with him.
Yeah.
And just the emotional driven nature of the trauma, how her family was lost, how she's extremely dramatic. So she's clearly a kid, but with all of these adult things that have happened to her. And they treat all of these things in a respectful and believable way. Now, of course, it's a film that you couldn't make today because of the certain inappropriate themes of the film. And certainly I can see that problem, but it's dealt with in a way that has a complexity that you don't get in cinema today. So, for example, if you made this in the internet age with social media and so on, like, this film would be cancelled before anyone had ever seen it.
I mean, it was banned in Australia, wasn't it?
Well, I think it was. I don't know. I don't think it was ever banned, but it was restricted in terms of its cut. But I don't think that lasted long. I think they got through the censors pretty quick. Nothing in the film, like when you talk about this sort of theme, because it's really precarious, right? Nothing terrible happens in the film.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
Okay. So it's not like it crosses any great boundaries. And in fact, all of this is driven by her, right? Because of her trauma and his slowness, right? So it's not like there's any grooming or anything going on, right? But there is a inference that she is interested in him in a romantic way, and she's a little girl and he's a full-grown man. Nothing happens, they like, it doesn't happen that way. And you can see that it's all driven by the trauma. You still couldn't deal with these themes in film today because people would get on their social things. But if you watch it in context of the film, it all makes sense.
It does, yeah.
And it's not like what you feel for the characters is a degree of heartbreak, right? Not like, oh my God, this is all bad. It's like, oh my God, this is really sad.
It's sad and then conflicting.
Yeah, well, because it's conflicting.
Morally conflicting.
The thing is, it's morally conflicting because we have strong morals about this stuff. Yeah. Understandably, right? And I don't know if the bigger live video will have got up by then, but I have very strong views on this as well. There is it's morally conflicting because of that. because this is portrayed in a way that is entirely believable and where there's no villains involved, that's why it's conflicting, because we have this black and white view of relationships, appropriately so, and then this situation, which is like a weird exception. It's not an exception in that a relationship between the two would ever be acceptable. Everybody knows that's not the case. It's that the fact that it came up as a possibility was the context of extreme trauma, and that trauma being dealt with in an appropriate way. So it's the difference between something does happen and something should happen. We all know that something shouldn't happen, right?
Yeah.
The fact that it does happen, and are there always villains? And this is the question that's really complex and where the filmmaker confronts us. So the thing that I like about this is this discomfort, okay? Because the filmmaker, Luc Besson, he's a French filmmaker with really clever artistic ideas. And he's like, let me put you in a very uncomfortable space, because it does challenge the way our intuition is about these things. Yeah. And it does throw us into a situation where you just want to hate on the villain, right? You just want to be
absolutely.
like, you just want to go, all right, that's the person responsible for this totally inappropriate like relationship, blah, 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 and make that emotionally easy.
Yeah, yeah.
And he doesn't do that. He's like, these are people who don't know any better, right?
I remember that one scene when she sees, the bad guys at the apartment, and she starts crying with her groceries, and then walks towards the Leon's door and just starts knocking. It's like, please let me in. Like he was conflicted in that situation. It's like, I don't know you.
Yeah.
He was, and then you could tell just that framing of him, his reluctance made you feel the character, he actually doesn't understand either. Like, and he's not, he doesn't have bad intentions.
Yes, yes. You see the tragedy of him. And late in the film, that tragedy is better explained. He doesn't know what to do. And then, of course, the action is excellent. The way they... Like the building in the climax is surrounded by hundreds of officers, and the way they deal with that, like, it's really quite intense. And then the acting is just something out of this world. There's no surprise that Natalie Portman went off to become a grade A actress. So it's one of those films that isn't talked about much on the internet these days, because people
can't talk about it without watching it.
Well, it's not just that. It's the fact that it is a very... Like, there are dark themes in it.
Yeah.
And no one wants to talk about a film with such kind of really confronting subject matters in the internet age. Like, people just don't want to go there. Understandably. But I think in terms of artwork, it's really destructive, because we need great filmmakers, great storytellers to confront us with things that make us feel uncomfortable. Not because they want to make grotesque kind of porn, right? They want it because they want us to understand more about the human condition and the human soul. And this film walks that line perfectly. It deliberately makes us feel uncomfortable. And it's funny, when I was a kid, it was when I first watched it. I was probably the same age as Natalie Portman, roughly, and maybe even a bit younger. And I watched it, and I didn't really get the themes, right? I was a kid, and I was just like, oh yeah, action film, and little girl becomes hitman. That sounds great, right? I didn't really get the context of the relationship that was developing there. And then as an adult, obviously with my paternal instincts and all that, someone my age, very different mentality, right? And so I can see all the things that I missed as a kid. And the fact that has, like, I have a different feeling towards it. Like, I have a much greater discomfort as an adult than obviously I did back then. That's really reassuring to me. It reminds me that, like, yes, I do have these ethics and I do have these belief systems and I do have strong views on this subject. But also I have an intellectual sophistication to be able to still appreciate this work of art, not as something that is dark. The fact that I feel uncomfortable and the fact that you will feel uncomfortable as well when you watch it. Great film though, great movie. I think is great. I think that's what good art should be. That's the domain of art.
I think so, right? Like art is meant to do like all three things. It's meant to confirm and validate some of your beliefs, perhaps. Then also, and then change and challenge them. Actually, that they have to do all three things to be good art.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I feel like nowadays they've only really gone to validate your beliefs so you can give us more money, and not really the other two.
In fact, it's worse than that because it's gone to pandering.
Oh, yes, pandering, yes.
So, the diversity gods, like the strong female character that can do no wrong. Like when we think of the strong female characters in the 90s, Sarah Connor from Terminator 2, Mulan, like I talked about last time. These are characters that are not Mary Sue's. They go through trial and struggle and traumas and difficulties and overcome changes and go through a hero's journey.
Or they don't, because Leon, she's a child and she didn't become like an ultimate badass at the end of it. Like she was through trauma, and when you get through trauma, you're still in trauma.
That's true. Her arc is quite something else. That's true. That's a really good point.
You acknowledge that. But I don't know. Like, I mean, I think when we discussed the movie after we watched it, like we had like the plant, the plant that they kept running around with this plant. And I found that, when she plants the plant at the end of the movie, I found like, oh, finally she's grounded. Like she's started to have roots in her life, rather than before they were just like carrying it to place to place to place. So I mean, it made me feel like, oh, there might be a possible outlook, but it's still going to struggle. She still will struggle.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a hopeful ending. And it was one of those films that you could almost get a sequel, but kind of glad we don't have one.
No, I don't want it.
And yeah, it's sort of a film that everybody who I know who has seen it loves it. They're just like, this is a great movie. Like Leon, The Professional, Luc Besson, Jean Reno, Natalie Portman. Look it up. Go watch it. Don't watch it in polite company. It is an R-rated film, right? And you will be confronted with things for sure. But I haven't met someone who has seen it who doesn't love it, right? They're not necessarily keen to talk about it on the internet, okay, because of just the lack of sophistication of discourse. But it is a good film. And that is the difference between, like, I haven't seen, there is a film out there that has made me like really cringe. And that was, I haven't seen it. So, again, this is the problem with the internet, right? Maybe this is my problem, but I doubt it. Because of the way it was advertised. There's a film, Cuties, might have mentioned it. I think we mentioned it, like, where this
the French film.
No, I don't. No. It's on Netflix. It was a Netflix film, and there was a bunch of like 10-year-old girls creating a what's it called?
Some dance competition.
Dance group. And what's that form of dancing called again? Twerking group. Oh, all right.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, so Ben Shapiro made a review at the end where he's like, look, they're actually saying that these things are bad, that if you watch in the context of the film, it's not glorifying it. But then
But did you see the ad?
Well, that's the thing. The way they marketed it was like, look at these young girls twerking. And the way in which the camera shots at the big dance where they're all doing all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The camera went out of its way to like show the crotch and show like it was just really gratuitous.
Yeah.
You could have conveyed that message the way Leon does, right? Which is that like trauma can lead to terrible things without having cameras zooming right in on like, just having it at a like, it's having the story drive it. So I haven't seen Cuties, but it's called Cuties, right? Like,
again, yeah,
what the hell, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, again, Leon has that respects its audience and also respects Natalie Portman because she was very young and had the permission of the parents as well.
Oh yeah, so we should say that when you watch the film, like her parents were heavily involved, right? So for example, she's smoking in the film, and her parents put down rules. This look, they can't be real cigarettes. She has to quit by the end of the film. Blah blah blah. So a lot of what we see in the film, her parents are a guiding part of that process, and that's an important thing to know.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it didn't need to have certain scenes for you to not understand the relationship and the dynamic and the problems around the film. And yeah, I feel like nowadays maybe art people who creating film like think the audience is dumb and they don't have the mental intelligence or capacity to think. I don't know. We'll have to see. But it was a really interesting film, Leon the Professional, and I definitely think it was good. It's weird to be like, we finished on a high note, because it's not a film you say that on, but it is like the way it makes you feel does.
It's a solid, yes. It's a feel good tragedy.
It's a feel good tragedy, exactly.
Yeah.
And I love that scene. We had like he just like has the bomb thing, and he's like boom boom boom, and it's
oh right, yeah, yes. It's one of the great death scenes, and yeah, do go out and watch it. We won't spoil all of it, but do go.
Probably did already, but yeah, okay.
A little bit, but not too much. There's a lot that goes on there, and also just at this point, I'd say that Charlene has endured, and I hopefully enjoyed, not just endured, but endured what, like 20 90s films, something like that, over the course of the last 4 months or so, and has gone through a journey of a lot of the Terminator 2, the Silence of the Lambs,
Pulp Fiction,
Gattaca.
That one.
Yeah, Gattaca probably number one.
Yeah, Gattaca's probably my favorite, just because it just holds up today. Oh, and Terminator 2, it just holds up to today. And
then plenty of others as well along the way. Independence Day, and all these 90s films, classic 90s films of the golden age of cinema. There were obviously there are other golden ages as well, but that was one where there was a large and a short burst of time. And Charlene has gone through the whole thing, and the reason I chose Leon last wasn't because I thought Leon was the best film, although it is a very, very good film, but because it's a really sophisticated film, and it's not the sort of film you go, hey, like
Casual Friday night.
Just with someone you don't know very well, be like, you want to watch this, like people could react weirdly to it. So I was like, okay, well, if I can be convinced that Charlene is able to deal with all these things, but no, absolutely crushed it. I think
the compliments of Silence of the Lambs was pretty uncomfortable already.
Yes, but the difference with Silence of the Lambs is that it's iconic, right? Like Silence of the Lambs is something that people talk about every day, and those scenes with Hannibal Lecter are scenes that people just see. Then they know, yes, it is very.
But it's a clear villain, I guess, and it's.
Well, there is a lot of politics about Silence of the Lambs today. We won't get too sidetracked, but of course, because the bad guy, not Hannibal, but the actual Buffalo Bill serial killer is a transvestite, and in the trans politics of today, is like, oh my god, he's being portrayed as a serial killer, right? And so the trans lobby, are trying to cancel Silence of the Lambs because of the bad guy being a trans person. But this is interesting. This criticism occurred at the time, obviously to a lesser degree because of the internet. But it occurred at the time, and the director, the writer, was saying, look, no, like he was rejected for transition surgery, like as not a actual trans person, someone who was trying to be something he wasn't. And this explanation didn't go over very well. So he ended up making Philadelphia. Philadelphia being a movie that's, I think, won a squillion Oscars, right? It was just one of the great films of the age. Philadelphia, starring Denzel Washington and Tom Hanks. And Tom Hanks is a guy with AIDS, right? And this is during the AIDS epidemic when people didn't really know much about AIDS. And even today, like I think 66% of infections are through gay men, right? So it's still, even today, something that affects predominantly the gay community.
Yeah.
But it back then had a great deal of stigma to it, right?
Yeah, obviously, because they had the ad with the grandma. What's it called? You know how they had the guy that's in like the robe. What's that thing called?
Grim Reaper?
Yeah, the Grim Reaper. Wasn't there a Grim Reaper ad or something?
There was.
And that kind of.
Yes, but there was so much stigma attached to it because it was thought that you would get it only if you were promiscuous and if you're obviously cheating on your wife or whatever. And that it was, for gay people, which people looked at, quite harshly.
Yeah.
And so here is a guy who got criticized for making a film where this pseudo-trans person was a serial killer. He then goes on to make Philadelphia, one of the most celebrated pro-gay films of the world history, which really attacked or took on that prejudice head on. I think for the United States was one of the factors that changed attitudes towards homosexuality in the United States, and certainly towards the AIDS virus, to the point where George W. Bush, people criticize George W. Bush. I am his harshest critic, but he was, of all presidents in US history, and remember, he's a conservative Christian, did more to eradicate the AIDS pandemic in Africa than any other person, let alone president, in world history. So even he, I think, was affected by this film, and it really changed the attitudes. Because what happens is there's Tom Hanks, he's a gay man and he's got AIDS and he's dying of AIDS. And he goes to Denzel Washington, who's a lawyer, and Denzel Washington is a conservative Christian in real life as well, right? So this is a big deal that he was cast. And Denzel Washington is like got all the prejudices that you would expect, a conservative Christian guy to have. But Denzel Washington in real life is like, is conservative Christian, but obviously doesn't have this prejudice. And the relationship between those figures evolving over the course of the film is very, very touching, and really goes to humanize this crisis. So it did a lot to tackle that stigma and prejudice. So that's just my defense of the director who made Silence of the Lambs, who personally was affected by this criticism. But no, people are still trying to cancel it for that reason. It's so stupid. But.
And that is why we need Seven recreated the way that you want it to have that same challenge.
Okay, so what she's saying there is that in the movie Seven, they drive out into the middle of nowhere for the final scene. Now, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Seven, please stop it here because this is an iconic scene. You can't watch Seven and know this is about to happen. But they have John Doe, they drive out to the middle of nowhere, and they open the box and it's the wife's head of one of the officers, and then the officer shoots him dead, right? Well, imagine that scene. But instead of going to the middle of the desert, they go to Baltimore or Harlem, someplace with lots of or Washington, D.C. with lots of black community, right? And John Doe, instead of being Kevin Spacey, this white guy, is a black man, right? And they take him out to the middle of nowhere. Same thing happens, like open up the box, there's a head in there. And then the white police officer pulls out a gun and shoots John Doe dead in front of all these people in cold blood, right? Without the context of knowing what he had done to provoke it. That would be intense. That would be intense. Yeah. Let's do it.
Right, we need the budget. We need the oh goodness.
Anyway, on that happy note, we've already been talking for a while. So
we have. Thank you so much for your support. This past week, I've just been so happy. Like reading the comments. I think I forget that people are watching. That sounds so weird because we're in an apartment just talking to a camera, but there's actual people around the world watching. And I'm so glad that we continuously try to provide value to you, and you'll come to support. So thank you so much. I don't know if there's anything else
just the studio. We didn't even mention it. So we've been working obviously on improving the proofing and all this. So This is just the first change. We're still kind of working around the space that isn't in frame.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're constantly improving this all the time. If you have any recommendations of things we might do differently in this background. But I remember from our old studio, for those that have been with us forever, you'll recall, like, I just found that the echoey of the room was much more contained because I had proofing for the whole thing.
Yeah.
So basically doing the same here and obviously improving the visuals of the background. So hopefully you're approving of that. But if you have any further ideas, let us know and we'll chuck them in the mix.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like Crispin said, he's got like his phone and like we can see whether we're in focus or not. So like, don't know if it's going to fail or not, but we'll see. Always improving. All right, any questions, any feedback, please leave them down below. Otherwise, stay safe and
ciao for now.